Training for UFC fights must suck, and you often hear a lot of complaints from fighters about how tough their prep was. However, nothing compares to what training that Dusko Todorovic had to go through after a car crash seriously injured his foot. Find out about this and other UFC news in this episode of Mixed Martial Arts News. Firstly, Dusko Todorovic gets injured right before a fight.
During warm-up, my leg just gave up and popped. So, yeah, it's crazy, man.
So what was your mindset when you were going out there? I mean, there had to be some fear or something.
No, man, I got mad. I was pissed off because that leg was, even from earlier stage, it was injured, and those things occurred to me pretty often, you know, where my foot would just go snap and get swollen and hurt a couple of days, and I got used to it, but to happen right before a fight and the fight that's so important for me, I got pissed, man, to be honest.
We found out rather prematurely that Dusko Todorovic had actually been hit by a car prior to his fight with Maki Pitolo on Saturday during UFC on ESPN 31. The fighter won that match, though, through a barrage of pounding punches that won him the fight via TKO. This win was an essential one for Todorovic, as he had been suffering consecutive losses after a 10-match undefeated winning streak. Knowing this reason, it makes sense why Todorovic went through with the match, despite facing such a gruesome amount of hardship because of the injury. Regardless or not, if you feel that his participation was justified, the problems he faced while training will send a chill down your spine. Next, let's look into how the injury happened.
Yeah, but it was a pretty deep wound. If you look at the fight on my left leg, the inner side was completely scraped because first couple of meters it was just dragging on the concrete, and then the guy climbed with the front wheel on my left foot and parked there. So he comes out, he's like screaming, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I'm like, "Man, go back. My foot is behind," and he's like panicking, starting to push the car with his hands, but obviously it doesn't move. So
the UFC fighter got hit by a car, and it really messed up his foot, as he says. The reason we are only now finding out about his injury is because the mixed martial artist put in a lot of effort to keep the injury a secret. According to him, almost nobody knew about his injury, even his own family. The fighter was desperate for a match, and he knew that news spreading about his injury could lead to cancellation, which he could not afford with his previous losses. He says only his partner and his coach knew, which must have been a pretty hard secret to keep, considering how he was on crutches for almost 3 weeks. Problems faced during the training. Initially, Dusko Todorovic told us he could only hit the gym and do therapy on his foot. Around September, he finally returned to the gym ready for a fight-based training regimen. Even then, he could not be at his 100% and was confined to mostly boxing on the bag without any major movements that would worsen his injury. This would explain why his win was a punching-based TKO. He sure got in a lot of practice for that. He prepared a bit for the wrestling part of the fight, but that was also confined to mostly controlled drillings. Everything in his usual fight training regimen had to be modified to accommodate for his injury. Next, pre-fight warm-up worsens injury. This made the fight worse for Todorovic. He was already fighting with a foot that was not functioning properly, and then while warming up for his fight, he busted the foot even more. Normally, when this happens, Todorovic claims his feet would swell up and would hurt him for days. This obviously was what happened after the fight, but during it, he would not let it stop him from securing a victory. Feeling an immense amount of anger for the unfortunate events that transpired, he harnessed that anger and used it against his opponent. A pretty successful strategy, but one can only imagine the amount of mental fortitude that must have gone into working through the pain. Or maybe his fight or flight instincts took over. Who knows? With an undisputed win racked up, Dusko Todorovic is thankfully looking forward to his full recovery before he participates in a full-blown fight again so that he can bring his A game next time. There is a chance he got lucky this time, but luck will not always work in his favor. Next, criticisms on Dana White. We know what you must be thinking. Why was UFC promoter Dana White not aware of this injury? There was a high chance that he had some form of awareness, and if so, why did he not do anything about it? This is not a street fight. It is a professional competition whereby UFC must perform mandatory health and safety checkups before the fight. As much as we can praise the mental fortitude of Dusko Todorovic, one must not forget that this sort of thing should not have happened to begin with. The amount of pressure put on fighters by mixed martial artists is pretty well known, and it's that pressure that compelled Todorovic to fight regardless of his injury. He had losses on his record, and if he did not clear those up, chances are that he could get fired fired. This has been the precedent set with previous fighters. Dana White's notoriously ruthless when it comes to maintaining the quality of the roster, but with the consequences of such decisions, you unfortunately see incidents like these. Now that we're done with our main story, let's move on to other news in the world of UFC. Dominic Cruz does not listen to Daniel Cormier. UFC fighter Dominic Cruz criticized fellow color commentator Daniel Cormier for his performance on the desk. While talking to the media about his upcoming bantamweight fight with Pedro Munoz, Dominic Cruz revealed that he tends to mute the television whenever broadcaster Daniel Cormier is on. He cited his reasons being how Cormier barely ever does any research for the fights that he commentates on, making him useless to listen to. If he does not know the fighting styles of each contender, you are often prone to making mistakes when it comes to the assessments you make about a performer. This is not an isolated complaint. Several fans have pointed out that Cormier just does not know what he is talking about. It is important to understand that there was not beef per se between Cruz and Cormier. According to Cruz, Cormier is a good friend of his and a legend of the sport, but these days, all he does is enter, collect his paycheck after the job, and leave. Cruz ended up praising play-by-play commentator John Anik, who he believes does a lot of homework and watches a lot of tapes before each UFC fight. Being an announcer himself, Cruz sympathizes with how hard it is to be a color commentator at such a high level. There are like 400 to 500 active fighters currently in the UFC with thousands of matches. Going through all these tapes must be a nightmare. Nonetheless, it is still part of the job, and one must do it, which allegedly Daniel Cormier never does. Dominic Cruz did praise comedian and popular podcaster Joe Rogan, who commentates exclusively for pay-per-views. He believes that Joe Rogan is an essential part of the UFC viewing experience and has been successful so far, because you really cannot filter a comedian now, can you? All in all, it would be exciting to see how his upcoming fight pans out, whether he himself has done the homework. Jon Jones anticipates a return to the octagon soon. Fighter Jon Jones has been planning a return as early as April of next year, but it really depends on the outcome of the heavyweight title match on January 22nd. Originally not a heavyweight, this would be Jon Jones' first UFC match in 2 years. His lack of fighting during those 2 years is attributed to his contract expiring. The UFC was negotiating a contract with him back in September, but that got delayed because of assault charges levied against him by his fiancée. This also eventually got him arrested, but he has yet to be filed any official charges against him. Furthermore, he was banned from his lifelong MMA home by his coach because of recent developments in his life and was told he needs to turn his life around. Jones did not take this well and announced his separation from the gym. He now trains with the other Jackson Wink coaches, such as Greg Jackson. Jones feels that he is in tremendous shape, although it is pretty up in the air if he'll get a fight to begin with. Jones is in contract with the UFC, and although that is controversial in itself, having someone who is accused of domestic assault would be a PR nightmare for the mixed martial arts promotion. Regardless, this is the UFC after all, and they have a bad precedence to begin with, so anything can happen. UFC legend returns to the cage. UFC Hall of Famer Rashad Evans is planning on returning to the octagon through Khabib Nurmagomedov's promotion, Eagle FC, which is set to have its first official U.S. event on January 28th in Miami. The MMA legend had retired in 2018 when he lost decisively to Anthony Smith at UFC 225 and was then inducted in the UFC Hall of Fame shortly after. Now, at the age of 42, he told MMA Junkie that he intends to fight either YouTuber Logan Paul or Roy Jones Jr. The Logan Paul call-out makes it seem like this is a publicity stunt, which it might be. Who knows? It might just be the beginning of another successful MMA stint for Rashad Evans. Only time will tell. Until then, we can only wait to see who his opponent will be. And that was it for the UFC news for today. What do you think about Dusko Todorovic's gruesome injury? And is Daniel Cormier any good in your eyes? Let us know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next news cycle.